My name's Laura. I used to think I had it all figured out. A good job as deputy head of finance at a big company, a husband, and a young son. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. At least, that's what I thought. My husband, Tom, worked in electronics sales. His income was all over the place. Some months he'd bring home a fat paycheck, others he'd barely scrape by. But we made it work. For 7 years, we'd been saving up to buy a house. It wasn't easy, but I was determined. Every spare penny went into our savings account. I'd clip coupons, buy generic brands, cook at home instead of eating out. Tom would grumble sometimes, but I thought he understood. It all fell apart on a Sunday afternoon. We were house hunting again, scrolling through listings online. Tom pointed at the screen, his eyes lighting up. "Look at this one, Laura. It's perfect." I leaned in to look. It was beautiful, I had to admit. Spacious, modern, with a big backyard. But when I saw the price tag, my heart sank. "Tom, we can't afford that. It's way out of our budget." I expected him to sigh and move on. We'd had this conversation before. But this time, something in him snapped. "Of course we can't afford it," he shouted, slamming his laptop shut. "We can never afford anything. All you do is save, save, save." He was on his feet now, pacing the room. "For the house, for Jimmy's education. But where's the payoff, huh? When do we get to actually enjoy life?" "Tom, calm down." "No, I won't calm down. I'm sick of this, Laura. Sick of pinching pennies, sick of never going anywhere nice, sick of wearing the same old clothes year after year. I deserve better than this. I deserve a better life, and a better wife." His words hit me like a slap in the face. I felt my cheeks burning, tears pricking at my eyes. But I swallowed hard, refusing to let them fall. "Tom, please," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Just take a deep breath. We need to be patient. We're almost there with our savings. Let's just calm down and talk about this." I thought my words would soothe him, that we could have a rational discussion. But I was wrong. Tom's face contorted with anger, and without another word, he stormed out of the room, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. I thought things would get better after Tom's outburst. But I couldn't have been more wrong. The next day, Tom came home with shopping bags full of designer clothes and a brand new smartwatch. I stared at him, confused. "What's all this?" I asked. He shrugged, a defiant glint in his eye. "Just treating myself." "Got a problem with that?" I bit my tongue, not wanting to start another fight. But over the next few weeks, it only got worse. Tom started blowing his entire paycheck on fancy restaurants, expensive gadgets, and nights out with his buddies. One night, as he was heading out the door in a new suit, I couldn't hold back anymore. "Tom, what about our savings? The house?" He turned to me, his face hard. "Life's too short, Laura. I'm done saving for some future that might never come. I want to live now." "But what about Jimmy's education?" I pressed. Tom scoffed. "My parents didn't pay for my education, and I turned out fine. He can get loans or scholarships. Besides, we can keep renting. No need to waste money on a house." I felt like I was talking to a stranger. This wasn't the man I married. As the weeks turned into months, Tom's behavior got more and more outrageous. He started staying out late nearly every night. On weekends, he'd suddenly have business trips, something that had never happened before in all his years at the company. And when he was home, it was like living with a constant critic. Nothing I did was right anymore. "Do you have to chew so loudly?" he'd snap at dinner. "That dress makes you look frumpy," he'd say as I got ready for work. "Can't you keep the house cleaner?" he'd complain, tossing his dirty socks on the floor. Every day, I felt myself shrinking, becoming smaller under his constant barrage of criticism. I tried talking to him, tried to understand what had changed, but he'd just roll his eyes and walk away. 6 months. 6 long, miserable months of this new reality. I barely recognized my life anymore. The warm, loving home I thought we had built together had turned cold and hostile. Finally, one night, I'd had enough. Tom had just finished tearing into me about the dinner I'd cooked, a meal that used to be his favorite. "Tom," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I think we need to live separately for a while." I expected argument, maybe even remorse. What I didn't expect was the look of relief that washed over his face. "Yeah," he said, nodding. "I think that's a good idea." His easy agreement felt like a punch to the gut. But it also confirmed what I'd been fearing for months: the man I loved, the life we'd built together, was already gone. The days after Tom left were a strange mix of loneliness and peace. I told myself this separation was temporary. That Tom would realize what he was missing, face the harsh realities of life on his own, and come back, appreciating everything we'd built together. I was so naive. It was a Tuesday evening when my phone started buzzing nonstop. At first, I ignored it, focusing on helping Jimmy with his homework. But when the notifications kept coming, I decided to check. The moment I opened my social media app, my heart stopped. There, at the top of my feed, was a photo that shattered my world. Tom, my husband, was standing on a yacht. His arm was wrapped around a stunning blonde with legs that seemed to go on forever. They were both grinning, the blue sea stretching out behind them. But it was the caption that really got me: "Starting a new life." I retreated to the kitchen, my hands shaking as I scrolled through the comments. Friends, family, co-workers, everyone was asking the same thing: who's that woman with Tom? Then, 5 days after the photo appeared, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Tom standing there, looking tanned and happy. Happier than I'd seen him in years. "We need to talk," he said, brushing past me into the house. I followed him into the living room, my heart pounding. "Tom, what's going on? Who was that woman in the photo?" He turned to face me, a smirk on his face that made my stomach turn. "That's Vanessa, my girlfriend." The room seemed to spin. "Girlfriend? But we're married." "We're just separated, Come on, Laura," he cut me off. "Let's not pretend. Our marriage has been over for a long time. Vanessa and we've been together for 6 months now." 6 months. The timeline clicked into place, his sudden change in behavior, the late nights, the business trips. I felt sick. "She's rich," Tom continued, oblivious to my distress. "And fun. She doesn't pinch pennies or obsess over saving. She lives for today. Plus," he added with a cruel smile, "she's a hell of a lot more interesting and beautiful than you. I want to marry Vanessa. Start fresh." I nodded slowly. In that moment, I realized our marriage had been over long before this conversation. Maybe it had been over the moment he'd slammed the door 6 months ago. "Okay," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "If that's what you want, we'll get a divorce." Tom looked surprised, like he'd expected a fight. But I was done fighting. As he left, already on the phone with his lawyer, I sank onto the couch. The divorce proceedings were a blur of paperwork and legal jargon. Tom and I agreed on joint custody of Jimmy. I wanted Jimmy to have both parents in his life, despite the mess we'd made of our marriage. But even with the divorce finalized, I was far from okay. The betrayal, the public humiliation, the sudden upheaval of my entire life, it all hit me like a ton of bricks. I found myself struggling to get out of bed in the morning, barely able to focus at work. That's when I decided to see a therapist. Dr. Reynolds was a kind, older woman with gentle eyes. "Laura," she said in our first session, "what you're feeling is normal. You've experienced a significant trauma. But you're here, and that's the first step towards healing." Those sessions became my lifeline. Slowly, with Dr. Reynolds' help, I started to process my emotions, to understand that Tom's actions were about him, not me. For Jimmy's sake, I pushed myself to heal, to move forward. I threw myself into my work, started exercising, even joined a support group for divorced women. Bit by bit, I felt myself emerging from the fog of depression. Then Tom married Vanessa. I tried to be happy for Jimmy, he seemed to like her well enough. But things started to change. It began innocently enough. Tom asked to have Jimmy for a weekend here, an extra day there. I agreed, wanting to encourage their relationship. But soon, those weekends turned into weeks. "Jimmy," I asked one day, "don't you want to spend more time here at home?" He shrugged, not meeting my eyes. "Dad's place is more fun." That should have been my first warning sign. But I brushed it off, telling myself it was natural for a boy to want to spend time with his father. As the months went by, though, Jimmy spent less and less time with me. When he did come home, he was different. Distant. And he always seemed to have new clothes, new toys, stories of exciting trips and adventures. Finally, after yet another weekend where Jimmy begged to stay at his dad's, I sat him down for a talk. "Honey, what's going on? Don't you like being here anymore?" Jimmy fidgeted, still not meeting my eyes. "It's just, Dad and Mom let me do whatever I want." "Mom?" I echoed, confused. "Yeah, Vanessa. She buys me cool stuff all the time. We go to amusement parks and fancy restaurants. It's way more fun than here." His words felt like a slap in the face. "Jimmy, you know we can't afford." "That's the problem," he burst out. "You never want to spend money on anything fun. It's always save this, budget that. Dad says you're stuck in the past, always worrying about the future instead of living now." Things spiraled quickly after that. Jimmy started refusing to come home at all. When he did, he'd complain constantly, comparing my modest home unfavorably to Tom and Vanessa's lavish lifestyle. The final blow came on a rainy Tuesday. I'd been trying for days to get Jimmy to come home for dinner. When he finally arrived, he took one look around our living room and sneered. "God, this place is like a village barn compared to Dad's house. I don't want to live here anymore." The months slipped by, each one harder than the last. I watched from the sidelines as my son grew up, becoming more and more distant. Every time I reached out, I was met with indifference or outright hostility. Then came the day that shattered what was left of my world. It was Jimmy's 14th birthday. I'd hoped, foolishly perhaps, that he might want to spend it with me. Instead, I got a phone call that changed everything. "Mom," Jimmy's voice was cold, detached. "I need to talk to you about something important." We met at a cafe, neutral ground. Jimmy sat across from me, looking more like a stranger than my son. Then he dropped the bomb. "I want you to give up your parental rights," he said, his voice steady. "Vanessa wants to adopt me." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "What, Jimmy, I'm your mother." "No," he cut me off. "Vanessa's my mom. She's been there for me, she understands me. She and Dad can give me the life I want. And," he hesitated, then plowed on, "she can't have kids of her own. I want to be her son legally." I sat there, stunned, as Jimmy laid out their plan. Tom and Vanessa had already spoken to a lawyer. All they needed was my signature. Over the next few weeks, Tom and Vanessa pressed hard. Tom was triumphant, gloating. I wanted to fight. Every maternal instinct in me screamed to hold on to my son. But looking at Jimmy's face, seeing the determination there, I knew it would only push him further away. With a heavy heart, I signed the papers. The finality of it crushed me. I spiraled into a deep depression. If it hadn't been for my mother, I'm not sure I would have survived. She moved in with me, forcing me to eat, to get out of bed, to keep living. Slowly, painfully, I started to rebuild my life. I threw myself into work, started volunteering at a local animal shelter. Anything to fill the void left by Jimmy's absence. 3 years after the divorce, I met David. He was kind, successful, and patient. He listened as I poured out my story, offering support without judgment. When David proposed, I surprised myself by saying yes. As we exchanged vows, I felt a mix of joy and sadness. This wasn't the life I'd planned, but maybe it was the life I was meant to have. Just when I thought I had my new life figured out, I discovered I was pregnant. The news hit me like a tidal wave of emotions: joy, fear, excitement, and a twinge of sadness as I remembered the son I'd lost. David was over the moon. He'd always wanted children, but had never had the chance. We threw ourselves into preparing for the baby, transforming one of the rooms in our new house into a nursery. Oh, the house! It was everything I'd ever dreamed of and more. Spacious, with a beautiful garden and a view that took my breath away every morning. As I stood in the kitchen, my hand resting on my growing belly, I couldn't help but think how different this was from the life I'd had before. I tried not to think about Jimmy. He never called, never answered my messages. But I couldn't help myself from checking his social media accounts. At first, I told myself it was just to make sure he was okay. But as I scrolled through photos of lavish parties, expensive cars, and exotic vacations, I felt a growing unease. The carefree boy I'd raised was gone, replaced by a young man who seemed to value wealth and status above all else. I watched with a heavy heart as he posted about peasants who couldn't afford designer clothes, or complained about having to interact with common people at events. The final straw came when he shared a rant about how people below his level shouldn't be allowed in certain clubs. That day, with tears in my eyes, I unfollowed his accounts. It hurt too much to see what he'd become. Months passed, and our daughter, Emily, came into the world. As I looked into her tiny face, I silently promised her that I would never let her go, never let anyone take her from me. As Emily grew, we started taking family trips. Nothing extravagant, just weekend getaways to the beach or visits to nearby cities. I loved watching Emily's eyes light up at new experiences, hearing her delighted giggles as David swung her around in the waves. Life settled into a happy routine. I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be constantly on edge, always worried about money or the next argument. With David and Emily, I felt safe, loved, content. Then came the day that turned everything upside down again. It was a sunny Saturday afternoon. David had taken Emily to the entertainment center for some daddy-daughter time, and I was enjoying a rare moment of quiet, catching up on some reading in our living room. The doorbell rang, startling me. We weren't expecting any visitors. Curiously, I went to answer it. The moment I opened the door, my heart stopped. Standing on my doorstep, looking older and somehow both familiar and strange, was Jimmy. He was taller now, his boyish features sharpened into those of a young man. He was dressed expensively, a gold watch glinting on his wrist. But it was his eyes that caught me. They were hard, calculating, so different from the warm brown eyes I remembered. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice deeper than I remembered. "Long time no see." I stood frozen, unable to speak. Jimmy's eyes roamed past me, taking in the foyer with its high ceilings and elegant decor. He let out a low whistle. "Wow, nice place you've got here. Looks like you're not doing too bad for yourself." His tone was casual, almost mocking. I felt a chill run down my spine. "Jimmy," I finally managed to stammer. "What are you doing here? How did you find me?" He shrugged, a smirk playing on his lips. "Grandma told me." "Don't worry, I had to work hard to get it out of her. She's quite protective of you." I made a mental note to thank my mother later. And to have a serious talk with her about boundaries. "Can I come in?" Jimmy asked, not waiting for an answer as he brushed past me into the house. I stood in the living room, watching as Jimmy sauntered in and sprawled across our pristine white couch like he owned the place. "What happened, Jimmy? Why are you here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, it's a real soap opera, Mom. Turns out my dear old stepmom wasn't as devoted as we all thought. Vanessa divorced Dad and kicked us both out of the house. Can you believe it? That impudent, gold-digging witch found herself a younger model and decided she didn't need us anymore. I winced at his crude language, but he was on a roll now. Guess I bet on the wrong horse, huh? He looked at me pointedly. Should have stuck with good old reliable mom instead of chasing the high life with that bitch. His words stung, bringing back all the pain of his rejection. But before I could respond, he switched gears. But hey, water under the bridge, right? You're still my mom. We've got a lot of lost time to make up for. His tone was jovial, but there was something calculating in his eyes that made me uneasy. I took a deep breath. Jimmy, I'm not sure it's that simple. You chose to cut me out of your life. Legally, I'm not your mother anymore. He waved his hand dismissively. Technicalities. Blood is thicker than water and all that crap. Besides, he grinned, think of all the money you saved not having to raise me these past few years. It's only fair you share some of that now, right? And there it was. The real reason for his sudden reappearance in my life. I'm sorry, Jimmy, but I can't just give you money, I said firmly. I have responsibilities here. I have a daughter to raise. Oh, so you replaced me, huh? He interrupted, his laugh ugly and bitter. Got yourself a shiny new kid and forgot all about your firstborn? I felt my temper rising, but fought to stay calm. It's not like that, Jimmy. Look, if you need help, maybe I could talk to David about getting you a job. A job? He scoffed, cutting me off again. I don't need a job, I need cash. Come on, Mom, you owe me. I don't owe you anything, I said, my voice finally hardening. You made your choice years ago. I'm sorry you're in a tough situation, but I can't just hand over money to you. His face darkened, all pretense of friendliness vanishing. You selfish, fat witch, he snarled, jumping to his feet. Dad was right to leave you. You're nothing but a nasty old hag who cares more about her bank account than her own son. Before I could respond, he stormed out, slamming the door so hard a picture fell off the wall. I sank onto the sofa, my legs no longer able to support me. Tears welled up in my eyes, spilling over as great, heaving sobs racked my body. This angry, entitled young man, how could this be my Jimmy? Where had I gone wrong? Was this my fault for not fighting harder to keep him? Or was this the inevitable result of the lifestyle Tom and Vanessa had given him? I don't know how long I sat there crying. All I know is that when I heard David's key in the lock, I hurriedly wiped my eyes, not wanting to worry him or Emily. But as soon as David walked in, Emily toddling beside him, he took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. Laura, what happened? He asked, concern etched on his features. I looked at my husband, then at my daughter, her innocent face turned up to me in confusion at seeing Mommy upset. In that moment, I made a decision. This was my family now. Jimmy had made his choice long ago, and I couldn't let his reappearance destroy the life I'd rebuilt. The morning after Jimmy's unexpected visit, my phone rang. It was my mother, her voice a mix of worry and excitement. Laura, Jimmy came to see me. He needed money, so I lent him some. I thought you'd want to know he's okay. My heart sank. Mom, please, don't give him any more money. He's not the Jimmy we knew. He doesn't want to work, he just wants easy money. Promise me you won't give him any more. After hanging up, I sat at the kitchen table, my head in my hands. I knew this wasn't over. Sure enough, a few days later, my mother called again, this time terrified. Jimmy had come back, demanding more money. When she refused, he became aggressive, shouting and pounding on her door. That was the last straw. David and I immediately sprang into action. We left Emily with David's parents and moved into my mother's house for the week. We took turns staying awake, always on guard. The confrontation we'd been dreading finally came on a rainy Thursday night. Jimmy showed up, clearly drunk, pounding on the door and shouting for money. I opened the door, David right behind me. Jimmy, you need to leave, now. His eyes were wild, unfocused. Not until I get what's mine. He lunged forward, but David blocked him. "I'm warning you," Jimmy slurred. "I'll make you all sorry if you don't give me what I want." That's when David called the police. As we waited for them to arrive, Jimmy continued to rant and threaten us. My mother cowered in the background, clutching her chest. The sight of her fear and pain broke my heart. When the police arrived, they quickly subdued Jimmy and took him away. As the patrol car drove off, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Later that night, I reached out to Tom on social media, hoping he might be able to help Jimmy. His response was cold. "Not my problem anymore. Vanessa left me, took everything. I've got my own issues to deal with. Jimmy's on his own." Reading his words, I felt the last threads of my old life finally snap. The next day, I went to court and filed for a restraining order against Jimmy. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but I knew it was necessary to protect my family. Months passed, then years. We never saw Jimmy again. Sometimes I'd lie awake at night, wondering where he was, if he was okay. But gradually, those sleepless nights became less frequent. Life went on. Emily grew into a bright, curious little girl. David's business flourished. One sunny afternoon, as I watched David pushing Emily on the swing in our backyard, I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. This was my life now, not perfect, but filled with love, laughter, and joy.